Shapeshifting really first came on my radar whilst I was looking into the research for the documentary that I made called Don't Mention the Reptilians. Of course, I'd heard of shapeshifting long ago whilst researching the ET abduction phenomena. Now, many people will know that experiences are contacted when visited by various ETs. They will often present themselves in a form more palatable as to simply not terrify the life out of the person that they're visiting. So when I say palatable, they may present themselves as something, a clown has been known to be a very common one. That was probably a few decades ago. In more modern times, often heroes and famous people, celebrities, even Disney characters have been reported by various witnesses, particularly children, because of course, as a child, if something quite scary looking is to present itself to you, that could be very traumatizing. In fact, the whole experience is very traumatizing anyway, for the most part. But particularly for a child, you can imagine the effect that might have. The shape-shifting phenomenon was difficult to present in Don't Mention the Reptilians, because a lot of the shape-shifting analysis that was on YouTube was done on mainstream movies and TV. So of course, to present that in the documentary is very difficult because the whole thing is copyrighted, and as a commercial project you can't do that. There's no way that, one, that the budget would stretch to that, and two, getting permission to include those clips in the documentary like that is near impossible. So what was interesting is that I was getting a lot of emails about the phenomena itself, and of course many people were pointing me in the direction of certain researchers, and one particular gentleman was called Richard Bruce. What was interesting about Richard's work was his backstory, and the fact that when Richard had started doing these video frame-by-frame analysis on shape-shifting from movies and people on TV, he received a lot of unwanted attention from the authorities, and that was what really drew my attention. What harm was he doing by simply making what many people would assume is just a little bit of a crazy theory?
I got into the alternative scene first when I started uploading my reptilian shapeshifter movies in early 2013. At that time, the entire nature of my life changed due to the massive reaction that uploading movies to YouTube caused, with Los Angeles Police Department vehicles buzzing my house, helicopters, airplanes, and squad cars that would follow me down the street, and 4 police officers showing up at my door saying that they were looking for the tenant that was gone for 8 months, and also making clear in that conversation that they were not actually looking for him, they were there for me. And they were there because of the movies that I was uploading on YouTube. Okay, so here's New Year's Day 2014, and it's a New Year's Day, so no one's out. Everything's very quiet, and these guys went ballistic, and here's where you're going to see the micro UFOs, and I'll show you that in a second. But here you'll notice that this guy, these police and police helicopters were circling directly over my house, and you can see from the curvature of the flight path of the helicopter that there's zero doubt that it's circling directly overhead. So you can see that the circle angle is right over my apartment. And now here's little micro UFOs, and I'm going to show you in a second and prove to you that these are actually little micro metal spy orbs of some kind, or just little micro UFOs. I don't know for sure what they are. They may even be aliens. Looks like a bird here, doesn't it? But watch carefully. I'll keep showing this. See? That's the same object further up as it moves past the helicopter there. You see it moving here like that, and I'll do several zoom ins so that you can really see it. But there's no question, it's a little metal object. You can fully see the light refracting off of it. And here it is coming slow, and you'll see You may mistake it for a bird, but even then, if you were to analyze it up close, you'd be able to tell it wasn't. But see right there, you can see it's definitely, it looks like one of those kind of a pea or jello mold shaped UFOs, but they're tiny. I would say that that's maybe 1.5 feet in diameter at the most. Actually, just looking at that, I would say it's maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 inches in diameter. But it could be bigger, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how far it is behind the helicopter. It looks like it's not more than 3 or 4 feet away, maybe 5 feet away as it comes to its closest point from the helicopter. But there's no question there is a metal object there, and it has a roundish shape, like a muffin shape. So you can't see there, but when it comes right here, bam, see? It's like a little metal pod of some kind. And again, you cannot see these with the naked eye because they're using the gravity technology and visibility, which makes it so that you can't see it. But when you video it, then it shows up in the video. So if they want to fly these little spy orbs or whatever they are, they're probably all over the place. I mean, they're probably right out there on my patio a lot of times when I look out. They're just there all the time. I mean, and it's interesting. I mean, if they're making that much expenditure over this, it's really quite something to see. Oh yeah, and here you can see the occupants of this police helicopter looking at me, and you can see the passenger in the back and the passenger in the front, and then the pilot behind him. And you can see that they are definitely looking directly at me as they are circling directly overhead. And the question you have to ask yourself is why? When I did my homework, as it were, and woke up, I realized that there is so much more going on here that we have an obligation, those of us who awaken to the truth, to do our best to wake people up who, as I was in my earlier life, not quite ready to know the full extent of what's going on under the scenes. And when you do this, it will perhaps put a shadow on your life that wasn't there before. But when you realize the crime that's going on, that is not even human, that's when you realize that we have an obligation to our fellow man to perhaps lead a more dark life, in the sense that we know the truth and that this makes us more serious. But we have an obligation because we have people dying, people suffering, serious things going on.
The phenomenon known as shapeshifting is very real. What is happening is that the person, and often is not, but not always, but often is not, these people have clairvoyant abilities anyway. For example, there are certain types of clairvoyance that can see the reptilian entity overshadowing the host person, but everyone else in the room will not be able to see that. But a certain type of psychic can see that. And like I said, it's not just reptilians hosting people. They can see a mantis being. Some people, we call them a collective, because more than one type of entity takes them up as hosts. So it's confusing for the psychic. One moment there's a mantis being, next there's a reptilian, next there's a Draco. What's happening with the shape-shifting is the morphogenetic blueprint resonance within the person's DNA, within the shapeshifter's DNA, is imbued with this reptilian DNA. And under certain conditions, maybe weariness, maybe the person is on illicit or legal drugs, maybe the person is agitated, maybe the person is very angry, maybe the location itself is a very dimensional vortex-ridden type place. All of the above can contribute to somebody shape-shifting, because these entities will cling on to people's auric fields. And even someone who is not a host, it's important to understand, because there's a lot of video online. Oh look, so-and-so shapeshifted, he or she is a reptilian. Maybe, maybe not. sometimes the person could just be very tired and maybe spend a lot of time around a negatively energized, what's been described as an organic portal, some really negatively energized hosted person. Maybe they had a relationship with that person, maybe they spent too much time with that person, but somehow or other, these entities had attached themselves to the auric field of that person, and momentarily they shapeshift.
So what are people seeing when they're seeing the shape-shifting? Well, of course I don't know. And one thing I will say though is that the idea of a hologram doesn't make sense to me because of what Arizona Wilder said, that in those blood drinking ceremonies they wear robes because they're going to shapeshift, which it seems to me means that it is a physical transformation. Now, the nature of that physical transformation, I have no idea. There's two main things I think about it. One is that it is a genetic or biological effect where, because they are interbred, half human, half serpent, they transform or they fluctuate. And that's why you see the shape-shifting, for instance, in moments of stress or action shots that we see in movies and or on television or in news, because it's like an involuntary thing. It slips, their shape-shifting slips.
Depending on the proportion of a particular genetics dictates whether you can shapeshift. So the higher the proportion of either Anunnaki, and that's coming back to your final point now, or Nephilim, the higher the genetics of that, the more you can shapeshift. And the more reptilian you have in you, you can also shapeshift. The problem is that it's very hard to control shapeshifting. You can't just say, today I will shapeshift. It will happen in certain circumstances. And also, people who are psychic can see it, the change in the person, but those who are not psychic can't see it. So for instance, finally, the young woman who I assisted, who was sent to me by the Rothschilds, she would tell me that when she was in university and talking with a group of girls, and suddenly her eyes would just go into snake eyes, slit eyes, and she said the people would just stare at her, but couldn't believe what they were seeing. And then she said she would see them walking away, shaking their head, and they would convince themselves that they never saw that. So it goes on much more than we would understand, but only people who are a little bit sensitive, a little bit psychic, will actually see that occur.
The other idea is that it is a technology, and that's an idea that begins to sound true to me, although I think you could have both. Once again, a complicated situation where there's a biological shape-shifting and then there's mechanical. I think it may be an ultra-advanced alien technology that they somehow got a hold of a long time ago from some very, very advanced aliens that had a technology where they could not only transform their appearance but also size and weight, and it actually converts a giant 9-foot-tall reptilian being into a 6-foot-tall human.
During the making of Don't Mention the Reptilians, I was contacted by an ex-army officer by the name of Tony. And while serving in Germany, Tony had woken up in the barracks one morning and turned over onto his side, only to see at the bottom of his bed a 6 to 7 foot reptilian humanoid being. That's how he described it. Now, what was interesting about this, there were a couple of things that were really interesting about it, is that one, Tony described it as partially see-through, and two, he also described a look of surprise on its face that Tony could actually see it. What's interesting about this particular account as well is that Tony described it as wearing a small metallic belt that consisted of 12 cylinders, 12 metallic cylinders, about 2 inches in length. And he got the feeling that this piece of tech had something to do with this creature's ability to, if you like, jump dimensions. Because after about a minute of staring at each other, Tony's in shock, the reptilian sort of weighing up the situation, he said, it just faded away to nothing. And he assumed, that this belt had something to do with that.
Once you think that this reality is solid, that immediately makes impossible vast numbers of things that are actually happening, but people will not accept they're happening because their sense of the physical says it's not possible. So you say to people, for instance, that these bloodlines can move between human and reptilian form. And because of the programming of the physical, they say that's not possible, you're mad. You can't move from a physical form to another physical form. And you know they're right, but that ain't what's happening. Because the reality is a holographic expression of decoded energy. Think of the wireless internet. If this building has the wireless internet, okay, where is it? It's beyond our ability to see it. But you get a computer and you tune it into the internet, and out of things we can't see comes a whole worldwide reality that can be accessed anywhere in the world, a whole collective reality called the internet, because the computer is decoding information from the field that we can't see, the wireless internet, into this reality. And what we're doing is we are doing the same. These are biological computers, as I call them, and they are constantly, not least the pineal gland and the brain and the genetic structure in general, are decoding information into a holographic reality. But in its prime form, it's just energy, it's just awareness. So with these bloodlines, the projected energetic field in public sight is the human field. It's the human information field. So if I was looking now at one of these bloodlines, I would look at them and I would see a human. Because that's the information field, that is the prime one, that is the one that any observer is decoding. But when they shift into the other field, the other information field within this hybrid setup, and often it happens, as people have described to me many times, when the person is in a state of fury or high emotion. You know when people get really angry or high emotion, you can feel like a charge of electricity going through you. That charge of electricity can shift the balance of the hybrid information fields, and suddenly the reptilian one becomes the dominant one, at which point you now start decoding the reptilian one. Now to you as the observer, the person has shifted from a human to a reptilian. But he hasn't done it physically. It's only happened in here as you've decoded one information field, then another, then the other one again. And when you start to understand that, and most people don't get even near to researching that deep in the rabbit hole to explain what appears to be impossible on the surface, then you can see how so many things, phenomena that are impossible if the world is solid, are absolutely possible and logical when you realize it ain't.
I believe what will happen as time goes on, because the frequency of the Earth is increasing. The Schumann resonance used to be 7.83. It's more like 12.3 something, 12.3 hertz the last time I checked, about a year and a half ago. In practice, what many researchers believe is that our days are literally shortening, whereas we had a 24-hour day in the past. Now it's more like 16 or even less hours in a day. That is a byproduct of the Schumann resonance frequency increasing, and all the intensified cosmic energy streaming in from the galactic core as a result of these Seifert bursts that Dr. Paul Laviolette talks about, these galactic superwave events, which create these celestially driven cataclysms every 12,500 or so years. I believe that will also have an effect, because try as they might, they chem spray the sky, we have a perma-chemtrail haze. The photonic energy from the sun activates our higher centers, activates our pineal gland. And they try to screen out the sun, as well as, poisoning us and general depopulation purposes of the chemtrails. It's a multifaceted agenda, but one of the agendas is to prevent us from ascending, if you will. But a lot of people are ascending anyway. They're becoming more intuitive, they're becoming more heart-centered, and many of those people are noticing the shape-shifting going on. And often as not, these shapeshifters, they're in positions of authority, whether it's in a local company or a corporation or high-ranking mucky-mucks on the world stage. People are seeing shape-shifting going on. It's real.
It's a Trojan horse scenario. You have somebody who looks human, who has a human position, who was once fully human, but has been taken over and is no longer human now in terms of the humanity or not of the being, of the spirit, of the non-physical driver of the car, who is actually inhabiting that body. So from a strategic point of view, you'd go for opinion leaders, decision makers, military leaders, religious leaders. You'd go for figures in the alternative community. You would, if you could. You certainly would. They would be hot targets. You'd go for anyone who is in a position to steer public opinion in certain directions or to make certain decisions. And what I was saying earlier about the inhumanity of many of the things that are happening on this planet, the inhumanity of the torture, of the of brutal warfare for no apparent reason, the destruction of the ecosystems, things that regular human beings would not do to each other. Then you ask ourselves, well, who is doing this? Who is calling the shots? How inhuman might a being be who is in an executive position who decides, yes, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, and we don't care? Executives of large companies, executives of multinational corporations who are only interested in acquisition of some kind, not in balance, not in harmony, not in anything that preserves the long-term integrity of the planet, including its ecosystem, including everything that for thousands of years we hold so dear and beautiful about this incredible planet. It's being trashed here. It's being mercilessly trashed. No human would do that. We wouldn't do that to our own backyard. We wouldn't do that to our own house. Why would we do it to the planet? Who's doing it and why? It does not seem to be a human agenda.
Now, even after 10 years of looking into the weird and wonderful of everything from ETs to reptilian beings to ghosts to jinn, shapeshifting does sound way out there. And what I find interesting, and many researchers have looked at this, is when you look back over the years, TV shows and movies, shapeshifting is one of those things, along with ET invasions, that crops up time and time and time again. And some say that they think it's a form of soft disclosure, that this information is being drip-fed to the public in an aim to sort of soften that announcement when it eventually happens, if it eventually happens, which many believe that it will.
As far as movies and media being possible leaks to the truth about non-humans, or in particular the reptilians, I think this is certainly possible, and I think that there are several movies that stand out in my mind as being movies that might be leaks. Well, in particular, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, for which I think that he was murdered. He was warned not to publish it, and he said, "To heck with you," and he was killed shortly after the release of the movie. And also Rosemary's Baby shows even a reptilian kind of baby at the end of the movie, and that those kind of movies seem to be kind of more realistic leaks, if you were. And then you have John Carpenter's They Live and The Thing and Aliens, which I think are all possible relevant information or visions, you might say, inspirations for what's really happening.
I think if you look at John Carpenter, the creator of They Live, if you look at his movie-making history, which includes Satanism and horror and what have you, this guy has at least some knowledge of what's happening. And I had to laugh. I said this in a book once, years ago, and someone wrote to John Carpenter saying what I'd said. And he wrote back to him, I saw the letter, saying, no, it wasn't. The aliens, inside the people, I was symbolizing the Republicans. And you go, yeah, John, all right, yeah, okay, you were, yeah. I mean, anyone who's seen They Live will laugh at that.
Well, of course, I'm a huge fan of They Live, the cult movie from the 80s starring Roddy Piper. And what a lot of people don't know about that is that the story was adapted from a short story by Ray Nelson called 8 o'clock in the morning. And the aliens, or the villains in that short story, were actually reptilian, serpent-like creatures. And it's just very interesting, that connection to me.
They Live. It's classic. And that time back too, where you have a small number of people who are actually not what they seem. They look human to people in everyday life, but when the guy put the sunglasses on that allowed him to decode reality on another level, that was the symbolism of it, he saw that they actually, behind the human form, they weren't human at all. And they were the people in power. They were the bankers, they were the politicians, they were the president, they were some of the police.
Another show is V, the original V, that shows these human-looking aliens coming in huge craft, but in reality they're reptilians, and they eventually can gain control of politics, the media, and everything else. And then a small band of resistance fighters develops, led by a woman. And there's a lot of metaphorical, metaphysical truth behind that, because some of the best spiritual warriors I've found are women. They're heart-centered, they have all these abilities, they don't operate from a place of ego, and they don't need accolades, they don't need fame or fortune. They tend to operate, the real players tend to operate on their own, under the radar. And many of them are women. So when I see this TV show, V, and it's led by a woman scientist or something, if my memory serves, that really resonated with me.
Well, Mark Singer was one of my childhood heroes, so of course he was the Beastmaster, and I remember it's one of my favourite movies growing up as a kid. So when I saw that he was the protagonist in V, one of the lead characters, I was hooked, and I had no real interest in, back then, in the ET phenomena at all. And of course V, the aliens came disguised as humans, but were in fact carnivorous reptilian beings that had come to Earth to take Earth's resources, the water, and of course humans themselves as a food source.
They have to let us know what they're doing or what they're going to do before they do it. It's kind of like a rule of the game from their point of view. And if you see it this way, it gets them off the karmic hook. What I mean by that is that if I were to tell you, the viewer watching this now, that I intended to burgle their house tonight, and I was going to do it by climbing in this window at 2 o'clock in the morning, and this is what I was going to go and steal. And if I told them that, and they didn't believe me, and they took no action, and I went and did it anyway, then I would be off the karmic hook, because it's their fault for not securing the window latch. It's their fault for not standing there with a gun waiting for me to come. It's their fault for not taking me seriously. It's like, well, I told you, and it happened, so now the responsibility is yours, not mine.
Media nowadays, major Hollywood films, are used to push an ideal which is either part of a programming agenda or it's an agenda to test out what the reaction is on the public. Any decent producer in Hollywood who's doing a science fiction or science fantasy film now will be heavily involved with the secret government or the secret service, whatever we want to call them, for a give and take, an exchange of ideas. If you look at Stanley Kubrick made his own deal that he could make as many films as he wanted and have oversight over it, providing he never told the truth about the supposed moon landings. And as soon as he broke that agreement, they killed him. So right through history from Hollywood, Hollywood is an integral arm of manipulation, mind control, and just focus grouping, just testing. So anyone who has an interest will look at a film and say, well, I look at that, look at that.
There are a whole bunch of different possible agendas going on with the sowing of these concepts in Hollywood. But to condense everything down into one short sentence, this is no accident. It's certainly planned.